So today I want to talk about something that most people are completely missing about what just happened between America and Iran. Everyone is watching the sanctions announcements. Everyone is watching the military posturing and the diplomatic statements. Everyone is watching Iran's response and asking whether it will back down. But almost nobody is asking the question that actually matters most to ordinary people around the world. Why didn't China need to do anything? Because that is the real story here. America tightened its grip today, new pressure, new restrictions, new signals of resolve. Iran looked at all of it and did not move. And China, the nation whose economy is most deeply entangled with Iran's oil, the nation that sits at the center of the alternative system being built to bypass American financial power, China simply continued as if nothing had changed. That is not a coincidence. That is a signal. And once you understand what that signal means, you will understand why the next decade of global power looks nothing like the last one, and why that affects your energy bill, your food prices, your job, your savings, and your future in ways that are already being set in motion. So today I want to walk you through exactly what America tightened, why Iran didn't back down, and why China never needed to respond at all, part by part, country by country, step by step. So let us begin. The first thing you need to understand, the foundation of everything else I'm going to tell you today, is what American pressure actually means in 2025 compared to what it meant 20 years ago. For most of the past 4 decades, American pressure meant one thing with near certainty: economic pain. When America imposed sanctions, the target nation felt it. When America restricted access to the dollar system, companies stopped doing business there. When America froze assets, central bank reserves disappeared. The mechanism was straightforward and it was devastatingly effective. Because every major transaction in the global economy ran through American-controlled financial infrastructure. You either complied with American rules or you were cut off from the system that ran the world. That mechanism still works. It is not broken. But for the first time in the post-Cold War era, it is no longer the only option available to a nation that wants to resist it. And Iran is the clearest example of what a functioning alternative looks like. Iran currently exports an estimated 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, the majority of it to China, settled in Chinese yuan, moving through financial channels that never touch American banks and therefore cannot be intercepted by American sanctions. That is not a workaround. That is a parallel system. And a parallel system, once it reaches sufficient scale, changes the fundamental calculus of what American pressure can and cannot achieve. The question is no longer whether American sanctions hurt Iran. They do. The Iranian economy has been severely damaged over decades of pressure, and ordinary Iranian families carry that burden every day. The question is whether American pressure is sufficient to change Iranian strategic behavior when Iran has an economic lifeline that operates outside American reach. The answer to that question is what today's events made visible. And the answer will determine the future of how America projects power. And what that means for the energy prices, trade routes, and economic stability of every nation watching. Let me walk you through every major player with that framework in mind. On the surface, America looks like a nation acting from a position of unassailable strength. Its military has no peer. Its economy remains the largest on Earth. Its currency is used in approximately 88% of all global foreign exchange transactions. When America tightens control, new sanctions designations, new restrictions on financial access, new signals of military resolve, it is not a nation acting from weakness. But underneath that surface, the tightening today revealed something important about the limits of what pressure can accomplish when the target has insulated itself from the mechanism that makes pressure work. The specific constraints are not theoretical. America is managing $39 trillion in national debt, a figure that shapes every major foreign policy decision because the financial system that allows America to sustain that debt depends on the dollar remaining the world's indispensable currency, a full military escalation with Iran risks triggering an energy price shock that would drive inflation directly into American households, raise borrowing costs at exactly the moment America can least afford it, and destabilize allied governments in Europe that are already managing their own economic pressures. So the tightening today was real and consequential. Access to certain financial channels became more restricted. Specific entities faced new designations. The signal of American resolve was communicated clearly, but the tightening was calibrated, designed to apply pressure without triggering the escalation that would be most damaging to the American economy itself. And Iran read that calibration precisely. A nation that has survived 45 years of American pressure develops an extremely sophisticated ability to read the difference between pressure designed to compel behavioral change and pressure designed to signal resolve without triggering the full cost of escalation. Iran recognized today's tightening as the latter. For ordinary American families, the consequences of this calibrated approach are not immediately visible, but they are real. Every day that the alternative system grows, every barrel of oil settled in yuan rather than dollars. Every transaction that bypasses American financial infrastructure is a day that the mechanism of American economic power becomes slightly less comprehensive. That is a slow process. But slow processes compounded over a decade produce dramatic outcomes. On the surface, Iran looks like a nation that should be calculating the cost of continued defiance very carefully. Its economy has been battered. Its currency has suffered dramatically. Its infrastructure has absorbed significant damage in exchanges with Israel. Its population is frustrated. Any rational calculation on the surface suggests that backing down even partially, even symbolically, might offer economic relief that the Iranian people genuinely need. But underneath that surface, Iran's decision not to back down today reflects a strategic logic that is more coherent than most Western coverage acknowledges. The Iranian government's calculation begins with a historical observation. Every time Iran has made concessions under American pressure, the pressure has not reduced. It has increased. The 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, was Iran's most significant concession in decades. Iran accepted strict limits on its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. 3 years later, America unilaterally withdrew from the agreement and reimposed sanctions that were more severe than before. The lesson Iran drew from that experience was explicit and has been repeated by Iranian officials consistently ever since. Concessions invite more pressure, not less. The second component of Iran's calculation is its changed economic position. With 1.5 million barrels of oil per day flowing to China in yuan, Iran has a revenue stream that American sanctions cannot intercept. That stream does not fully replace what Iran could earn in an open global market. The discount Iran accepts on China-bound oil is significant, estimated at $10 to $15 per barrel below market price, but it is enough to fund the government, maintain the military, and sustain the economic lifeline that keeps the strategic position viable. The third component is the regional and global environment. Russia provides diplomatic cover at the UN Security Council. China provides economic cover through the energy relationship. A growing number of nations in the global south are actively building trade relationships outside the dollar system, reducing the isolation that American pressure is designed to impose. For ordinary Iranian families, none of this strategic logic puts food on the table or restores the value of their savings. The economic pain is real and deep, but for the government, the calculation to not back down today is not defiance for its own sake. It is a considered bet that the strategic environment has shifted enough to make holding the position sustainable. On the surface, China is Iran's largest trading partner, its most important oil customer, and the economic foundation that makes Iran's resistance to American pressure possible. You might expect China to be at the center of today's events, issuing statements signaling its position, making diplomatic moves in response to America's tightening. China issued no statement. China made no diplomatic move. China simply continued, and that continuation is the most powerful signal in this entire situation. Because China never needed to respond to America's tightening today for the same reason that a river does not need to respond to a fence built on one of its banks. It simply flows around it. The infrastructure China has built over the past 20 years, the yuan-denominated oil settlement system, the Belt and Road trade routes, the financial messaging alternatives to SWIFT, the $400 billion Iran partnership, the energy relationships across Russia, Central Asia, Africa, and Southeast Asia, all of it was designed precisely for a moment like today. A moment when America tightens its grip on the dollar system and China's parallel system demonstrates that it can continue functioning without interruption. China imports approximately 40% of its energy needs, with Iranian oil representing a critical and growing portion of that supply. Every barrel of Iranian oil that continues flowing to China today, despite America's tightening, is a proof of concept. It demonstrates to every other nation watching that the alternative system works, that a major oil exporter and a major oil importer can conduct business at scale outside American financial infrastructure without being stopped. The nations paying attention to that proof of concept are not limited to Iran and Russia. They include Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Brazil, India, and dozens of smaller nations that have quietly begun diversifying their financial relationships away from exclusive dollar dependence. For all of those nations, China's ability to simply continue today, unfazed, uninterrupted, unresponsive, is more persuasive than any diplomatic statement could be. For ordinary Chinese families navigating a difficult economic period, high youth unemployment, a weak property market, cautious household spending, none of this strategic positioning feels like a victory. But for China's government, today was a day the long game advanced without a single move being required. On the surface, Russia is the nation that has already lived through the version of American pressure that Iran is now facing. Complete exclusion from SWIFT, frozen central bank reserves, coordinated Western sanctions across every major sector of the economy. Russia was meant to be the proof that comprehensive American financial pressure could bring a major economy to its knees. But underneath that surface, Russia is now the proof of something different, that a major economy can survive a comprehensive American financial pressure, adapt to it, and build the alternative infrastructure that makes future pressure less effective. Russia currently conducts the majority of its oil trade in currencies other than the dollar, primarily yuan and rupees. Its trade with China has expanded dramatically since 2022. Its financial systems, forced by necessity to develop outside Western infrastructure, now provide a functioning model that Iran has studied closely and other nations are beginning to examine. And the specific numbers tell the story clearly. Russian oil exports, which Western analysts predicted would collapse under sanctions, have remained resilient, redirected to Asian markets at a discount, but continuing to flow. The ruble, which collapsed initially, stabilized. The Russian economy, predicted to contract catastrophically, has instead demonstrated a painful but real capacity for adaptation. For ordinary Russian families, that adaptation has come at a genuine cost. Higher prices, restricted access to Western goods, and the pervasive uncertainty that accompanies living inside a sanctioned economy. But for the governments and strategic planners of every nation that has ever feared American financial pressure, Russia's continued functioning is the most important case study currently available. And today, as America tightened its grip on Iran and Iran did not back down, Russia's example provided part of the answer for why Iran believed that position was sustainable. On the surface, most of the world's nations are observers in the confrontation between America and Iran. They did not choose sides. They are not party to the decisions being made in Washington or Tehran or Beijing. They are watching, but underneath that surface, every major government watching today's events is conducting its own version of the same calculation. What does this mean for us? What does it mean that American pressure tightened and Iran did not move and China never needed to respond? The nations asking that question most urgently are the middle powers. Countries large enough to have strategic options, but not so large that they can set the terms of the global system themselves. India, with 60% of its oil from the Gulf and a long-standing policy of strategic autonomy, is watching. Brazil, with the largest economy in Latin America and growing trade relationships with China, is watching. Saudi Arabia, building economic ties with Beijing while maintaining American security relationships, is watching. The nations of Southeast Asia, building manufacturing bases that serve both Western and Chinese markets simultaneously, are watching. What they are watching for is the same thing markets, businesses, and investors are watching for: a signal about which system is gaining credibility and which is losing it. Because the decision about which financial infrastructure to build your future into, which currencies to hold reserves in, which trade routes to develop, which settlement systems to connect to, is a decision that compounds over decades. Getting it right early is enormously valuable. Getting it wrong is extremely costly. Today's events sent a signal. America tightened, and the alternative system did not flinch. That is not a decisive moment. The American-led system remains dominant by every major metric, but it is an accumulating one. And for ordinary families across the global south whose governments are quietly making these infrastructure decisions right now, the direction of that accumulation will shape their energy costs, their trade access, and their economic opportunities for a generation. So now let us zoom out and look at the biggest picture of all. Because when you place America's tightening, Iran's refusal to back down, China's uninterrupted continuation, Russia's demonstrated survival, and the quiet calculations of the middle powers all on the same map, you see something that no individual actor's behavior fully reveals on its own. You see two systems running simultaneously and the gap between them narrowing. For 30 years after the Cold War, there was one system, one set of financial infrastructure, one reserve currency, one dominant military power with the will and the resources to enforce the rules. The word for that was unipolarity, and it meant that American power was not just strong, it was the only serious option available to any nation that wanted to participate in the global economy. What today's events illustrate is that unipolarity is not ending dramatically. It is eroding incrementally. America remains enormously powerful. The dollar remains the world's dominant currency. American military capability remains without peer, but the alternative system, the yuan settlement network, the non-SWIFT financial channels, the energy trade conducted outside dollar infrastructure, has reached a scale where it can absorb a major American tightening move without flinching. And here's the crucial insight that most people are completely missing. The erosion of unipolarity does not require the alternative system to win. It only requires the alternative system to survive. A system that survives American pressure becomes, over time, a system that attracts more participants. More participants make it more resilient. More resilience attracts still more participants. That is a self-reinforcing cycle, and today was a day it continued turning. The consequences of that cycle are not abstract. They land on real people in real ways. Higher energy price volatility as the old system's stability guarantees weaken. More complex supply chains as companies hedge between systems. Greater currency risk for nations whose reserves are concentrated in a single system. And for ordinary families everywhere. In America, in Europe, in Asia, in the Gulf, in the global South, a background level of economic uncertainty that was simply not present in the unipolar years. This is not a crisis, it is a transition. Transitions are manageable if you understand them. They are dangerous only if you insist that the old system is still operating exactly as it always has, because then the changes, when they arrive, come as surprises rather than as developments you have already prepared for. Today was another day of transition. America tightened, Iran held, China continued, the system kept moving. I want to end with the most surprising conclusion of this entire analysis. You might expect me to say that the winner of today's events is Iran. Iran held its position under American pressure. Iran demonstrated that it will not back down. Iran has a Chinese economic lifeline that makes its resistance sustainable. Surely, Iran is the one that comes out of today stronger, but actually, no. The winner of today's events is not Iran. Iran is still operating inside a deeply painful economic situation. Its people are still carrying the burden of decades of sanctions, and its currency is still dramatically devalued. Its economy is still constrained in ways that cause real suffering for real families. Holding a strategic position under pressure is not the same as winning. The real winner of today is every nation that used the past decade to build economic flexibility. The nations that diversified their currency reserves, developed trade relationships across multiple systems, built infrastructure that serves both Western and non-Western partners, and resisted the pressure to fully commit to either system before the terms of the new order become clear. Think about what that list actually includes. Countries that maintain trade relationships with both America and China, countries that hold reserves in multiple currencies rather than concentrating exclusively in dollars, countries that have built domestic energy capacity alongside international energy partnerships, countries that have kept their diplomatic relationships broad rather than narrowing them to a single alliance structure. These are the nations that, regardless of how the confrontation between America and Iran ultimately resolves, will have the most options available to them. They will not be forced to absorb the full cost of whichever system loses. They will have the flexibility to adapt as the new order clarifies. The lesson of today is not that defiance works or that pressure fails. The lesson is that flexibility is the most valuable strategic asset in a period of systemic transition. The nations and the people who built that flexibility quietly, patiently, without announcing it, are the ones best positioned for what comes next. That is not weakness. That is the most sophisticated form of strategic preparation available in a world where the rules are still being written. So let us just recap what we covered today. America tightened control, new sanctions, new restrictions, new signals of resolve, but did so in a calibrated way that reflects the real constraints of managing $39 trillion in debt, allied fragility in Europe, and energy price sensitivity at home. The tightening was real. Its limits were equally real. Iran did not back down, because 4 decades of experience with American pressure has taught Iran that concessions invite more pressure, not less. And because the Chinese economic lifeline, the Russian diplomatic cover, and the changing global environment have genuinely shifted the cost-benefit calculation of holding the strategic position, China never needed to respond, because the infrastructure it has spent 20 years building was designed precisely for moments like this. The yuan oil settlement system, the alternative financial channels, the $400 billion Iran partnership, all of it continued functioning without interruption, demonstrating to every watching nation that the alternative system works. Russia provided the historical proof of concept that a major economy can survive comprehensive American financial pressure, adapt to it, and build the resilience that makes future pressure less effective. The middle powers are reading the signal quietly, calculating which system is gaining credibility and making the infrastructure decisions that will shape their economic futures for a generation. And the real winner is not Iran or China or Russia. The real winner is strategic flexibility and the nations that built optionality across both systems and will be best positioned to adapt as the new order clarifies. America tightened, Iran held, China continued. The transition from a unipolar world to something more complex moved another step forward. The question is not whether this transition is happening, it is already here. The question is whether you and your country are building the flexibility to navigate it. Subscribe for more analysis of the forces reshaping global power, explained in simple English. And tell me in the comments, do you think America's pressure on Iran can still achieve its strategic objectives? Or has the alternative system already grown too large to be stopped? I will see you next time.